First item on the agenda is the review and acceptance of minutes. Can I get a motion on the minutes?
Yes. So let me see here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I make a motion that we approve the minutes of October 2nd as revised.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
And then I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes of October 16th as amended.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you. We'll move right in to elementary schools, and update on photovoltaics is first, I guess, Scott. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We just wanted to report to the Building Committee that currently, after taking all of the input from the Building Committee and the Sustainability Subcommittee and the analysis of where photovoltaics on the site could be most effective, but also not interfere with view corridors and in any way impede the visual sight lines to existing buildings. On the two sites, we have currently the following proposed locations, and I'm going to start with the Hosmer and the site-mounted solar canopies. So you can see on this site plan that we have two canopy-style arrays over the parking area in the northwest corner. We have two canopy-style arrays over the parking area that would be in front of the drop-off building to the main school. And then we have a ground-mounted canopy array over the parking that exists along Hancock Street. With those collective ground-mounted arrays combined with the roof-mounted PV or solar panels, and I'm going to jump to the roof-mounted just briefly here. This is the Hosmer roof plan. This is the entry to the elementary school. This is the entry to the Early Childhood Learning Center, just for orientation's purposes. This is the drop-off drive over here. All of the blue area represents areas that we feel that we can get roof-mounted photovoltaics, and these are low. We've talked several times about various strategies for roof-mounted photovoltaics, and in the end, the most effective way to load the roof with the maximum amount of PV was to do what we call the low rack system, which means the panel is really only about 12 to 14 inches off the ground. And that does a number of things for us. It eliminates any concern we have about sightline or visual impact from the ground or from Mount Auburn Street or from the neighborhood to the PV. It allows us to pull the photovoltaics back from the roof edge in a fashion that we don't have to introduce a guardrail on the building, and it gets us a fairly efficient layout. So at the Hosmer, collectively, with the site array and the building array, we've got just over 2,000 panels that produces 958,000 kW. And right now, the energy model for the building shows that the building would utilize about 950,000 kW per year. So clearly, we're very close to being able to provide enough PV on the site and on the areas that I was mentioning and on the roof area to meet the overall energy need for the building. And just as an FYI, when we talk about the ground-mounted canopies over the parking, we're essentially proposing a canopy that would look similar to the one you see in this photo, but we've actually shown a cross-section because we're proposing a V-mounted canopy because it reduces the size of the members a little bit and provides the necessary rigidity. You can see it projects out over the parking space, and then to counterbalance that cantilevered load, it projects out over the sidewalk that would be along the parking spaces. So that's just giving you a sense of scale of someone on that sidewalk. That's actually showing the side, an 8-foot wide sidewalk showing the mounting of the canopy, it's showing the start of what would be the curb, and then it's showing the parking space. And then this is looking at it elevationally, just to show you that there would be 2 parking spaces between each one of these canopies. Does that make sense? Any question about those? Just to give you a sense of what they would look like.
Vinnie?
So the snow sliding off would be into the street?
It would, depending on the location. If you, let's just go back. The one that would be sliding off would be there on Boylston Street. These are sliding off into the grass area or the lawn area, and then this one sliding off into the lawn area, and then this one sliding off into the lawn area. The only one that actually abuts a street would be the one on start of Boylston Street there. And in a rain event, it wouldn't be our intention that these would be waterproof. That's meaning that they would be completely sealed. There would be some gaps in them. They're not intended to be full canopies and keep somebody completely dry. You can do a canopy that's fully sealed, but it compromises a number of things. So it would be our intention that there would be some gaps between these, but more or less.
An inch gap between each set of panels?
Right. It's not between every panel, but every once in a while there would be, between rows, there would be a gap. And we could certainly change that. This is just currently sort of where the design stands. And the reason we're talking through where the design stands is we're currently, so that the building committee has more accurate information and the sustainability subcommittee has more accurate information with which to review photovoltaics for both sites, the Cuniff and the Hosmer. We have asked the cost estimators who are currently estimating the 60% construction documents to give us specific estimating on these canopies so that we'll know how much the ground-mounted canopies cost, and then give us also an estimate on these specific arrays for photovoltaics. In the past, we've just used approximate numbers, estimated numbers based on the energy produced, et cetera. We've asked them to give us very specific numbers based on these. And so we'll have that information to review with the subcommittee and the building committee when the 60% cost estimates are complete.
If I could ask one more thing. So, again, the ones that on the far western side there that appear to drain into the street, from a DPW stormwater management standpoint, if there was a grass strip or, it would be better if they actually went into the vegetated area
Sure.
rather than dump it all into the roadway and into the storm drain. So that may just be a question of moving it over like a foot or something to align that with the grass planting strip, which may need to be something other than grass if it's going to take rain onto it. So, but I think that would work nice from a stormwater management standpoint.
Based on your comments, we'll absolutely take a more detailed look at that one specifically as we move forward with the design. It definitely makes sense.
Laurie?
I do have some concerns about plowing with these, because I can't push it back because there's sidewalks there, and I can't push it to the side because I got columns in between there, so that will be challenging.
One of the things we did do, let's see here. And we can continue to, it's a very valid comment, we can continue to work on strategies for making snow removal easy. But these columns actually sit between the vehicles, meaning they protrude into the spaces a little bit. You can sort of see it on this very first one. It's not uncommon to have these protrude into the spaces themselves because structurally it's a little easier to accomplish the cantilever. But we are designing them to pull them completely out of that space so that if you are running a plow perpendicular to the parking spaces, you could put it right on that curb and sort of keep going as you're pushing down through there versus having to try to work around a column or potentially hitting a column. But we can continue to look at any kind of recommendations that you might have for how we make that plowable. And then just taking a look at the Cuniff. On the Cuniff site, as you may recall, we had some panels in this area that were getting a lot of shading and weren't very efficient. We had some panels on the opposite side of the parking area from this section, meaning we had them over this area. They weren't very efficient, and there's complications with mounting them based on the proximity to the property line. And so when we reduced it to and we had one in front of the building, which ultimately there was some feedback from the committee, and we agree that aesthetically, certainly, it would be very obvious and a significant element in front of the building. So currently on the Cuniff, we're showing this large array that just goes along this side of the parking area. It ends up being 300 panels. And then on the roof, we've got the roof plan loaded with again, the blue areas that you see represent photovoltaic panels. I would point out that this is a sloped area of roof in this location. It's the slight slope up on the building, and it's a 1 in 12 pitch, and we are looking at strategies for placing photovoltaics in this location, and we're looking at strategies for increasing the roof photovoltaics at both Hosmer and Cuniff, meaning attempting to take advantage of every square foot available. So we're not resting on these diagrams and this amount of PV. It's just where we stand currently. Without any PV on this section, and with this particular array on the roof, we've got a total of 850 panels for about 400,000 kWh. And we know that the energy model for this building is suggesting it would utilize about 590,000 kWh, hence the reason we're still looking to add more panels to this roof in some fashion. It likely means that on this slope roof, we're going to have to do some kind of attached panel system should the building committee ultimately decide to include that much PV on the Cuniff Elementary School.
Paul?
Scott, will we have HVAC mechanicals on the roofs of both buildings?
We have makeup air units. It's very light, but the graphic right here represents a makeup air unit. There's another one right here, and then there's another unit right here. So everywhere that you see the panels kind of stepping back, it's to step back and accommodate for those, yes.
Okay, now with the newer, lower model that you're proposing, will there be some sort of flagging or some way to know that they're there when we get a big snowstorm? Because I've witnessed the boot prints across the PVs when the technician goes up to work on the mechanicals and walks straight across the roof.
Sure. We could certainly take a look at flagging those corners of the PV layout arrays. Yeah.
That'd be great, thank you.
Shame on them.
John?
I had a question back on the site plan for the Cuniff, I guess the slide before. So, I mean, you mentioned on near the line with the cemetery. So I don't know whether, are the trees that are listed there accurate, or are they just not necessary? I don't remember whether there's an entire tree line over that. I guess I'm wondering whether where you just had the red arrow, that whole area there where there's a path underneath it, kind of right up to the line of the cemetery, whether that's an option. It seems to be outside most of the shade area of the building, at least from this graphic, and along that line there, whether that makes sense.
We could definitely take another look at that area. This particular shade graphic is just showing one time a year and one time a day, and that may have been one of the arrays that ended up shaded too much, but we could certainly take a look at that area, and then it'll come down to whether we can get a large enough array there outside of the specific tree shadowing to make it efficient, but we can certainly take a look at that. We're still looking at both of these to try to maximize. We just didn't, because we're doing detailed cost estimating and the information's starting to get very firm, we only wanted to base it on things we were certain about, but we're still taking a look at any potential areas.
I don't know, I don't remember exactly what the elevation would be over there, but, you know, we do own the cemetery as well, and maybe if we had to go a little bit into the cemetery, that could help you, potentially. So if you don't, I know you're still looking at it, so I think without disturbing any of the
Residents.
the people that are there,
That's a good point. I mean, it's not a rigid boundary in that sense. It's not a private property that we have to deal with, so, I mean, there's some flexibility there.
It is a good point, and it's something we hadn't thought about at all, but we can take a look at that as if it's not an absolutely firm property line and kind of what's located in those proximities.
Yeah.
Sure.
Laurie?
I would just add that if we do that, we need to be careful of that easement that's there. If I had my way, I would get rid of that easement because there's a lot of problems, but if we start making that our property, then we're adding a lot more maintenance to what we don't have right now, and that is a problem easement.
Lots of issues to deal with. Come on up to the microphone, please.
Meredith Fields from WE3C. Just to revisit the question of along the side of the building that people were not happy with how it looked, is there a way to think about how to integrate a design such that it would look nice and would still be workable and would give us that extra PV?
I think before we would revisit something in front of the building, just based on the comments that we received, I think before we would revisit that, we would look very carefully at other locations on the site. At one point in time, we had an array back in this location. It was smaller, but if we can't come up with a way to get additional panels on the sloped area, and if after we look more at keeping in mind that a roof-mounted array is going to be the least expensive option always. So we want to keep pushing the roof possibility, but if we can't get there with this array, and we can't get there with additional array PV on the roof, and the building committee really wants to get there, then I think we would look really hard at some other ground areas, and then as a last resort, maybe revisit that. The other item that the building committee has discussed somewhat, that we just wanted to point out that could potentially be accommodated, involves the composting of food in the dining area in the kitchen. And so we just wanted to quickly point out that should the school district continue on the path that they've presented, and they've presented more information to the sustainability subcommittee than to the building committee, but we want to just point out that both the Cuniff, the Hosmer, and the Lowell are all designed so that they can have a composting and recycling area. This happens to show the composting and recycling areas in the Hosmer dining area and the dump sink where any kind of liquids are disposed of as part of that composting and recycling process. And so we've got those two stations in the Hosmer dining area. And then there's also been discussion about the ability to wash utensils and utilize metal utensils. We just want to point out that the kitchens do include a ware washer for utensils. And then there's also been discussion about the possibility of including a space within the schools that a future dishwashing station could be located. So we're pointing out that at the Hosmer, in the student dining area, there's a storage room in this location that if the building committee so desired, we could bring hot and cold water and a drain to, so that that equipment should sometime in a future year, future date, or many years down the line, there be a decision to do tray wash and install that equipment. This would not include the actual equipment for the tray wash, but would just have hot and cold water and a drain. We are showing that in this space, in the Hosmer, we could provide those utilities. And then for the Cuniff, we're showing the same kind of thing. In the Cuniff, because it's a smaller population, a single recycle, excuse me, composting area. The utensil washing that is being built into the kitchen for utensils, and then a potential area where we could bring hot and cold water and a drain, again, at the building committee's discretion, to ensure that if tray wash equipment was brought in and you wanted to reconfigure to support that in the future, at least the most challenging component of that, the plumbing, would be in place for that. And then at the Lowell, we, in taking another look at it, it will have the composting stations or recycling stations. It also has the utensil washing. And then if the building committee wanted to, we do have the addition that's occurring at the rear of the dining area that includes toilets, a receiving area, et cetera. And what was previously the recycling area, because there's a storage area behind it, we could bring hot, cold water and a drain into that area, so that you could, in fact, in the future, if you wanted to, have the challenging part, the plumbing part, ready for tray wash in the future. The building committee had asked on a few occasions kind of how challenging that would be. We think that it would be relatively easy to bring those, just the hot and cold water and the drain, into those, excuse me, locations as part of the construction.
Questions on this section? Heidi?
Actually, go back on the arrays. On the long side of where it kind of is, like it's the cemetery, would there be any opportunity to create an overhang on that roof that would stick out, maybe a couple of feet, and put another row of cells there?
On this edge of the roof?
Or any edge, block that one, where nobody would really see it. Just thinking if we were trying to get more on the roof, so that's the least expensive way to go, and it wouldn't take up any of the light area or ground space.
It would be, in that particular case, it would be less expensive to find a ground-mounted location, because we've already got a slight cantilever on all of these roof edges, and so we've kind of maxed out what we can accomplish without significantly modifying the structure there for more cantilever of the roof.
Kelly?
Would it be okay if I also ask a PV question, just because I was getting settled?
Sure.
Okay. I just was going back to the budget really quickly and just want to understand,
Let's not go, we'll do budget stuff.
oh, even if it's PV related?
Well, the PV array thing, if it has to do with that, yes, but we have some other recommendations from the Sustainability Subcommittee on.
Oh, okay. I didn't see that on the agenda, the budget review, so I'll
There-
wait.
Well, we did a budget review last week, that's why we
Okay.
didn't
So
put it
I
on this week. So
will wait to ask my
Let's
question.
wait a little while to ask budget questions. Any other questions on this part? Yes, Maureen?
What effect does, it's Maureen. What effect does composting and anything else, can it attract rodents of any sort? Because once you get rodents into a school, it's really, really difficult to get them out. How is that contained? I know that sounds like a ridiculous thing, but schools do get
That's a very controllable problem. I would defer to the superintendent because there was a really nice presentation done on composting by the school department. I don't want to imply that I know as much as they do or that the food service department does.
I would say that my knowledge is growing every day. So one of the things that part of our proposal around composting, in terms of our curriculum and integrating it into our schools, would be having the compost taken away a couple of times a week through a service. So the idea would not be that we would have large compost piles in the schools. I think people are envisioning, like in the back, there'd be a very large compost pile.
That's what I was picturing.
No, the compost would actually be taken away by a company that specializes in composting, which then we would get some of that compost material back. But additionally, we would have smaller composting piles, which we already have in our gardens. So, I mean, we would like to have a little bit of that as well, but it would be controlled in terms of, containers that aren't out in the area for the rodents to get into, but we certainly do not want to have rodents in the schools 100%.
Right, because it's very hard to get rid
Yep.
of them.
The schools that
because
have had success with this are the ones that use the service to come and pick up the compost, so that it doesn't end up being outside for a very long time.
Okay, well, thank you.
Pat Rathbone, and I'm not sure where this goes, but I had heard that there was a possibility of a study of the solar, the PV, and I just wanted to mention that in that regard, Cambridge used a company called Solar Design Associates in Harvard, and that they were very happy with the analysis they did.
Thank you. Any other questions? Go ahead, Scott, on your next.
Just quickly, when I know we went over a more detailed schedule for all the tasks at the last meeting, but this is just the cost estimating schedule for the next month and a half. The 60% construction documents were sent out to the 2 independent estimators on November 22nd. Those will be completed and exchanged with us, with the design team, with OPM team, and between the 2 estimators on the 18th of this month. We've already scheduled a reconciliation meeting with Hill, or through Hill, for 12/20. Both Hill and AI3's cost estimator have agreed that they would have complete reconciled estimates for the 24th. And so, assuming that we stay with that sequence and there are no surprises, then right now it appears that the January 15th building committee meeting would be when that information would be available. So we just wanted everybody to know that that's kind of the sequencing of that information and when it may be discussed.
Questions on this? Scott?
I think Leo had a question.
Did you have a question, Leo?
My hand a little late. 60% CDs, congratulations. Are there any gaps that we should be aware of in either the set or the cost estimation that, is a line item of an allowance or any significant allowances?
With the 60% CD set, we have filtered out, I think without any exception, Leo, any kind of major allowance. The documents, I can't, in DD, there were a few items. In CD, I think there's enough information on all the documents in all areas that there won't be any allowances. One of the things, just the photovoltaics, for example, was one kind of allowance, and that's the reason we wanted to get some more detailed estimating on those. And in fact, we have more documentation on those than you see that's obviously being given to the cost estimator. So I can't think of anything. Certainly, as Hill is going through the 60% documents now, we're doing our own review of our own 60% documents now, and then as part of the reconciliation, we'll see if there's anything like that, and if there is, we can certainly call it to the attention of the building committee.
Lowell?
Okay, I think that's
You don't have anything on the Lowell?
Nothing on the Lowell.
I'll take Kelly's questions on the budget.
Actually, I have a quick question about the 60% CD set. Is that being issued to the committee, or has it been?
The committee set is in Steve Magoon's office, and so there's one hard copy set there, and then electronically, we can certainly post it through Hill like we did on the DD
Yeah,
set.
that'd be great, thanks.
Okay.
Just budget question really quick, just because I also missed the last meeting, sorry about that. But I'm just noting that on the current budget, right now we've got 50% photovoltaics carried in the budget with 0 additional PV. Do we have a plan for how we're going to cover the cost of what's currently shown in plan, Mr. Chairman? Or team?
Well, I would just say in addition to that, the line item for 50% of the PV, there's another line item within the total project budget that is, I think it's about $2.6 million for discretionary spending. That's the line item that if the committee should decide to commit, that's outside of the committee's owner's contingency, outside of the construction contingency, outside of all the other contingencies, that particular $2.6 million is at the full discretion of the building committee and would be utilized to cover something like the PV.
Do we at least have a rough order of magnitude of what we're talking about, in addition to the $700,000 that's shown in the budget?
We do. I'm trying to remember exactly what the total amount was, but in the cost, in the budgeting, we did.
I'm just recalling that when we were talking about site voltaics last time, we were around $2 million alone in site voltaics. So,
Yeah, certainly the 700,000 plus the 2.5, which would be 3.2 million, is not intended to cover all of the PV for all of the energy that both buildings would need. That was never the objective of the budget. With this 60% set, the purpose of looking at exactly how much this PV will cost is to try to reconcile how much of the PV could potentially be covered within the total project budget.
I like that we have the bucket for the other miscellaneous costs. I just don't want to use that entire bucket on solar PVs, so I just want to make sure that there's a plan so that we still have some money for some owner-added items or client-added items. Okay. Yep.
If you're intending as like for owner-added items, there is a soft cost contingency below the line that would be for owner changes. So in the budget, that's already accounted for, whatever change orders are brought forth by the owner. The discretionary fund is just separate of that.
Yeah, I just thought the soft cost contingency, and we can talk about this offline, of 1.1 million was a little light, so that's why I just want to make sure that, you know, we're just, it'd be nice to have some transparency in where we're at with all of it, that's all.
Anything else on this section? Did you have another question, or?
Might as well ask it.
Kelly clarified it for me, but I will ask it. The current array that we've reviewed tonight and we're seeing here and was posted in the 60% CDs covers the net zero target, correct?
The Hosmer array that we saw tonight covered the net zero target. The Cuniff array, as shown in this documentation, is at 400,000 kWh, and the energy model right now shows that the total energy used for the Cuniff would be 590,000 kWh. So we're searching for more PV opportunities on the Cuniff site.
Thank you for explaining that.
Sure.
Anyone else from the committee? Brian?
Brian Haybison. I just had a couple of quick questions. One was, I'm still a little bit unclear about the budgeting for the solar. If the intention, my understanding of the intention of the building committee right now is to build to a net zero design. So is the budget going to include enough solar, given the potential capability of the CUNF to actually include that solar, but from a budgetary standpoint, is the budget going to include enough solar for a net zero design?
Well, I'm going to say, I'm going to try to answer your question. It's clearly in the budget, we don't have enough money to do this. At some point, the committee's going to have to make choices. The the goal is still net zero buildings. The committee at some point is then going to have to decide something about these buildings is going to have to give to come up with the money to, which is called value engineering. We haven't done any of that at this point. So until we do the necessary cost estimates, which they're working on, and the necessary items there's an item on the next committee report where we're going to bring in someone to do some consulting, clearly isn't enough money. So we're going to have to make choices. But I believe that the committee is still working towards, it's still got the goal of net zero buildings. I hope that helped.
I think that does clarify things. I guess I'm trying to figure out exactly at what point we decided that there wasn't enough money to do the project as the original goal.
First of all, when we first started this project, we weren't getting 2 new buildings, so we didn't have that goal.
Right.
And the budget changed slightly, but as we moved along, we moved towards the goal of net zero. That wasn't the original goal when we went to this. So it's been an evolving process, and we're going to have to evolve as a committee to meet the needs that we are expecting to get out of these projects.
Right. I guess my understanding was that when we changed the design for the 2 new buildings, was that part of the goal at that time was to go for net zero for the 2 buildings. Not that we can necessarily meet that, but that was the stated goal at that time, and that we did have a fairly high confidence that we could actually meet that goal with the budget that was expected. That was my understanding at the time, and I'm just trying to understand if that was a misunderstanding of mine at the time, or if things have shifted. I'm trying to understand that.
Well, just in terms of the timeline alone, the $170 million budget was adopted well ahead of the building committee and the sustainabilities committee, subcommittee's adoption of that official net zero goal.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember the exact details or everything, but I do remember that at the time that we discussed going to the 2 new buildings, a stated goal at that time was to be going for net zero. I do remember
But we
that as
didn't
being a stated
attach a
goal.
dollar amount to it at that time.
Sure, but I
The
do...
dollar amounts are evolving now. Again, the committee is still got that goal. The committee is going to have to make decisions about potentially something inside the building that would be taken away so that we can meet that goal.
Right. I'm just, my understanding at the time, the discussions were
Okay,
that...
unfortunately, we have a little bit of a misunderstanding. Okay?
Can I ask one other question?
Sure.
Related to this. When you're looking at the cost for the solar, are you including in the baseline cost of the construction the requirements that are there for normal code? In other words, the requirements for the loading for the roof and the conduits and all that stuff, that's just in the baseline. You're not including that as an additional adder for it. So the additional cost for PV is just the cost for the panels, inverters, racking, that kind of stuff for the roofing, right, for instance.
That is correct, with the exception of the additional cost also includes the ground-mounted solar canopies.
Right. The ground-mounted solar canopies are certainly an additional cost. Okay, thank you.
As well as the conduit for the solar, for the ground-mounted canopies as part of the base or the add?
The conduit for all of the ground-mounted is part of the add. The conduit for all of the roof-mounted is part of the base building construction.
Just a recommendation, because I can sense some concern from the community, is I think we should have some options that we're presenting as a committee of what we need to achieve monetarily in order to get to net zero, and where we would stand on an energy basis if we were to go with what's currently in the budget. I just think that, again, in being fully transparent, just being able to lay out those options clearly so that everyone understands where we are, where we could be, and what would be required, I think it would be helpful for everyone because there doesn't seem to be some confusion. So just a recommendation for the committee.
Laurie?
I'm just going to respond to that. The subcommittee and sustainability committee has been working on this for a couple of months. We've got a lot of that information. Some of it will be presented tonight. Some of it will be presented in the next few weeks, next few months. But we've gathered a lot of that data. There's still a lot more to do, but we're starting to do our homework already.
And I would just reiterate, the reason we gave the cost estimators detailed design for the roof PV and for the site-mounted PV and for the canopies is we wanted, with this 60% set, to be able to roll out that detailed information so that the building committee did know exactly what the decision points were in terms of how much they can include and other adjustments they may have to make depending on how much PV they want to include in the project.
Anyone else? I want to move up the Sustainability Committee report.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
John?
Sure. So the Sustainability Subcommittee has met several times in the last several weeks to look at two main issues which we've been talking about already. One is the cafeteria trays in the school buildings, kind of reusable or compostable, and the other is the solar panels. So in the materials that were given to the building committee, there was a one-page summary that hopefully you had a chance to look at, which kind of highlights some of the key issues and also has a motion related to both of those items. So I'll just kind of summarize the summary, if you will, and then can respond to questions, and those people that have presented can. So on the first issue, on the reusable or compostable in the cafeteria, around cafeteria trays, we had a presentation by the superintendent and the director of food services who presented a variety of information, different kinds of information in support of compostable trays. The superintendent, as she's indicated before, has kind of in favor of putting this in as part of a curriculum that will incorporate the school gardens, which are currently at the elementary schools. We looked at some financial information comparing the two, and we had some community input, and I think there was a document in the materials that you received that also summarized some of the information from the Watertown Faces Climate Change and the Watertown Environment and Energy Efficiency Committee. I think earlier in our presentation, Scott did mention, he showed us where in the three schools they could locate space for potential dishwash machines at a later point. And so that was kind of the direction we were ending up going to, which I think was also talked about here at this committee, at the full building committee, once or twice in the past as well. And then we end up with a motion at the end, which the subcommittee approved. The motion, I'll read it, was to recommend support for the proposed composting program by the school department and request that architectural designs incorporate within existing space appropriate connections to accommodate tray washing equipment if it is desired in the future. And that, again, was approved by the subcommittee. So I think I'll open that up to questions if people have.
Well, let's make the motion, put the motion on the floor first.
Well, make that motion.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second it.
Now, discussion.
Okay.
Leo?
I just have one question. During your analysis, did it evaluate the embodied carbon of each system? For example, the embodied carbon in compostable tray manufacturing and shipping to site may be higher than the reusable trays. I don't disagree with the study, and I don't disagree with the finding and movement. I think we're going in the right direction. I'm just wondering if it factored embodied carbon into this analysis.
We did not.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
So if I could just make the comment about the fact that, again, just the idea behind this is to have a fully incorporated composting program that really is meant to provide our students with the experience of really being good citizens, being good global citizens, and understanding, their place in the world and the impact of their waste and how it is to be responsible. So I think that with a full composting program, which incorporates that learning in the classroom, I think that we'll achieve that goal. And I'm very pleased with the fact that we've had some updates in terms of the design to have that possibility in the future if that's the direction that we wanted to go into in terms of dishwashing. But we think that right now, this is the best thing for our students and our school, and I appreciate the support.
Any?
So just to Leo's question, I think the fact that we're voting to support both the composting program as well as potential for future dishwashing or tray washing gives us the option, there's no free lunch, literally. Whether you're spending energy and water to wash stuff, or whether you're buying compostable trays and things and hauling them away, there's a cost to everything. Where that is, would be a very complicated calculation, and I think what we may calculate today may be different than what we may calculate 10 years from now. So I think this allows us to do one or the other and change it in the future if we want to, because we are building in the capacity for washing. If we decide, it's a more environmentally friendly to wash the stuff than compost it and haul it away. So I think it keeps our options open, and as the science evolves and technology evolves, we'll know more in the future.
Kelly?
Sorry, can I just comment on what Vinny just said?
Sure.
So I completely agree. I think this is the best of what we know at the moment. I think that the reason I raised the question is because in the future, when we do these analyses, we're going to be looking at that level of depth, and I think we should prepare for that. Thanks.
Kelly?
And can you remind me the time frame for how long it takes for the tray to fully degrade?
If it were in the actual, land waste landfill, it would be 4 to 6 weeks. They're
Okay.
pretty quick to compost. So ideally, we would have, like I said, an area within our schools that we would have a small compost area that we would see that in action, but ideally, the majority of it would go out to the composting company to compost quickly. But if we were to, even if we weren't to have that pickup plan with Black Earth would be the company that we think that we would go with, it would be 4 to 6 weeks in a normal landfill.
And then are we talking about utensils or just tray?
So right now, we're not talking about utensils, but that's why we are building having the under-sink, under-counter dishwashers, so that if we were to go to compostable silverware, we don't think that we'd actually want to do that because it's kind of tricky to eat with, not the most pleasant experience. So then we might do a combination of washing the silverware, but composting the trays. So that's why we wanted to make sure that we had a dishwasher under the counters.
Okay. And there's no issues with the kids figuring this all out?
In terms
Just
of?
as a parent of a 5-year-old, just trying to understand that they are fully on board with understanding how this all works?
Yeah, so one of the things that we intend to do is to form like a recycling club and have our older students be kind of in charge of monitoring the younger students in terms of making sure they put the stuff in the appropriate places. When you're 5, you might not comprehend why that's important, but you're building those habits, and then later on, they'll understand why that is important. But it'll be part of the curriculum. Even in the kindergarten standards for science, there's a whole composting unit, so hopefully it'll be quick.
We'll catch on.
Yep.
Thank you.
If I could just add one more thing to that, just from a composting standpoint, whether it's going to go to aerobic composting or anaerobic composting to make methane, there's so many unknowns at this point that the one thing that is certain is the Mass DEP Municipal Solid Waste Plan will require us to reduce our municipal solid waste from 2020 to 2030 by 30%. So we are going to be under the gun to reduce our municipal solid waste, and the schools are a big generator of waste that we need to sort of reduce it. So there's going to be a lot going on over the next couple of years on this topic. So.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it, unanimous. John, continue.
So the second item is with respect to solar panels, which we've already been talking about quite a bit already. And the focus of our attention on that was particularly around the option between ownership and a power purchasing agreement. And Lori Cable presented a PowerPoint, which I think could be made available to the committee, where she outlined some kind of the basics of it. And many people, I think, are aware of some of those issues. There's quite a few variables involved in terms of the length of a contract, the tax credits that would be available to the PPA, the electric rate that you would lock in for whatever length of time, et cetera. Lori also emphasized the timeline. It's a fairly lengthy timeline to put one of these in place, and it would certainly, to do a PPA would involve the town in a legal process, because they would be the ones that would have to authorize the contract. It wouldn't be the school building committee. I mean, we would clearly make a recommendation, but it would be the town that would have to do that. And there's some feedback, input from the community also, kind of pros and cons on ownership versus the power purchasing agreement. Clearly, probably a major advantage of the power purchasing agreement is the lowering of initial costs, because they are the ones that purchase and put the solar panels in rather than the town. But there's pros and cons as you look at it in a long-term issue. So we did not make a decision about that or a recommendation. We clearly realize that additional information is needed. And it's also at that point that Scott talked about, as he's already mentioned, with the 60% construction documents, we will get more definitive information on what the costs would be, which I think is a really important factor to plug into this. And so we're looking forward to that probably in early January. That would be likely available. In the interim, we also had a discussion about the importance of getting accurate information and potentially hiring a consultant, outside consultant, to provide assistance in preparing materials on both options, so that the Sustainability Committee, Subcommittee, and the full Building Committee has kind of the most information available to make what I think is it's an important decision for the community, which way we go in terms of ownership versus a power purchasing agreement. So in that regards, we do have a motion on the sheet here, which is to recommend that a consultant be hired to do an independent analysis of PPA versus town ownership of solar panels for the elementary schools project. And that motion was approved 3-0 by the subcommittee.
Okay, can I get a motion? Would you?
I'll read, again, recommend that a consultant be hired to do an independent analysis of PPA versus town ownership of solar panels for the elementary schools project.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Discussion now. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it.
That's it. That's it.
Just to be clear that this is going to be an analysis from an outside firm to give us the pros and cons, and we would, again, to John's point, the town council would be the one making the ultimate decision of whether to go in this direction. So this is going to be a little bit of a long process, no matter which way, if we choose to go in that direction. Vivian, did you have anything else? Well, I guess you are now dismissed.
In a nice way.
Thank you.
In a nice way.
Okay, back at it, now we're going to the high school.
Mr. Chairman, tonight, Compass and AI3 just wanted to start a conversation with the building committee about the conceptual options that the building committee may be considering as part of the high school project. And just as a reminder, the challenge before the building committee over the next 3 months is not to decide on the design of the high school or not to even decide on the specific location of the high school, but just to come to a conclusion by the end of February on what sites or options the building committee feels would be viable for continued study into the future, which would essentially be between the end of February of next year and September of next year. So the only way we know to establish what that list of conceptual options would be is to start to have a conversation about what they might be. And so tonight's presentation is intended to just start that conversation. And there may be so much content here that we may not get through it tonight. It's not our intention to get through all of it, no matter how long it takes. It's our intention to wait and see how much comment there is, how much question there is, leave the opportunity for the committee to ask questions, make comments, and just kind of see where we are as we get closer to 8 p.m. So we're gonna move through it. Through you, Mr. Chairman, at any point in time, if there's a question or a comment you'd like to entertain, it's not intended to be a complete or definitive presentation where we go all the way to the end. So we'll just see how that goes. As we've commented in the past, there are some locations that we at least thought initially should be on the table, primarily because they're town-owned parcels, and they include the current high school site as an obvious choice, the site that includes Victory Field, actually the 2 fields that exist there, really 3 fields, and the DPW site combined, looking at that collective parcel, and then the Moxley Field site, just because it's a town-owned parcel. And so most of our conversation tonight is going to be around those. One of the things that we want to be conscious of, there are many things we want to be conscious of as we think about potential locations for the high school, but we certainly want to balance out the recreation and open space and not do anything that conflicts or contradicts with the town's master plan with regard to recreation and open space. So we've identified on this town-wide map some of the key recreation and open spaces throughout the town, both in terms of parks and in terms of recreational fields that surround current schools, like the Hosmer, where you have the fields along Mount Auburn Street. And I think that this committee is probably more familiar than we are with these locations, so we're not necessarily going to walk through each of them, but each of these green areas do represent in some form or fashion open space, green space, or recreation space throughout the town. And we just want you to know that Our work will continue to be conscious of that, conscious of access to public transportation, all those key elements in terms of the pros and cons of any potential location. In no particular order, we are going to be suggesting that the construction of a high school on the existing high school site is plausible. Certainly it would have impacts, but it will be something that we consider a viable option to be studied until or unless we hear something otherwise. But we've started to identify some of the impacts that this kind of project, meaning proposing a new high school on the existing high school site, might have. And this is not intended to be a definitive list of them. Hopefully, over time, in both discussion with the building committee and going out to the community and asking for their input, we would get a more exhaustive list of potential impacts, or the feeling that the community believes are impacts associated with this kind of project. We know that, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the high school building itself, because we want to point out that the original 1929 high school was a very symmetrical building that faced Columbia Street. And so the portion that you see that turns back to right here was part of that 29 building. The building came over and it had an identical portion that turned back to a line right across here and went straight forward to this corner and across. So in 29 it was first built. This 50s edition didn't exist. This 50s edition didn't exist, and obviously the 80s and the 2004 editions didn't exist. And the reason we mention that is as we think about potentially, the only way to construct a new project on this site and continue to allow the high school to occupy this site would be to consolidate somewhat, much like the Hosmer Elementary School project. And when we think about demolishing portions of the existing building, we look at areas that we would potentially want to build, but we also look at the areas that would be easiest to remove on the existing building. So when we think about this high school site, we think about the 80s addition across the back of the site as a piece that was added at a later date and has its own utilities, its own services, et cetera, and is not easy to remove and certainly would be a big impact to program, but a possible piece that could be removed from the building. And then we think about the 50s addition. And the reason I mention those two is because in thinking conceptually about this project, we have to think about whether removing that amount of the existing building would free up enough area to potentially construct a new high school on this site. And it'll be some of the things that we'll be looking at in more detail as we move forward. But in this stage where we're just trying to decide what options we will study in the future, it's important to know ahead of time what our thoughts would be and how it may or may not be viable. But you can see some of the impacts. Clearly, in order to construct a new high school on the site, a portion of the existing building would have to be demolished. Clearly, you're talking about a phased, occupied construction project if you don't have some place to relocate the students to, which is very challenging as part of any high school project because you have so many specialized programs that have to be accommodated for if they're to be relocated to another facility. You almost need another high school, which very rarely happens. Just as I pointed out, the 70s gymnasium and the 50s addition are kind of prime candidates if you did want to free up some space. One of the impacts would be certainly even if you do and complete a new high school project on this site, students would still travel to Victory Field for much of their athletic, fitness, and recreation. A positive impact potentially would be that it allows the high school to continue to occupy a central location if that becomes a priority goal. If the project does just stay on this site, it avoids impact to other sites or other neighborhoods. We do think that the topography on this site might allow for some lower-level parking under the building footprint. We think that this project is going to require, no matter where it gets relocated, located or relocated, we're going to have to think creatively about how to accommodate the parking on the site because of the limited amount of land that's available within the town. This kind of project at least wouldn't impact any other recreation or open space. It kind of keeps the status quo when it's all said and done in terms of what people are accustomed to. But as we move on through the next 3 months, we'll be attempting to assign some really conceptual cost impacts to some of these options, but at this point in time, we're just starting a conversation about kind of some really general pros and cons. We would point out that this is the definitive boundary of that site. I think everybody knows that the cemetery is clearly to the south, and then we've got, although the building doesn't comply with the setbacks, we've shown the zoning setbacks on the site. And then we've shown the topography across the site. The reason I suggested that it might be a candidate for first-level parking under the building is you can see we've got a change from 40 to 30 across the site from Columbia Street moving south. Just for the sake, this is not a building design. We're not even close to that stage yet. But just to give you a sense of how, if a building of the approximate size and magnitude was placed on the site, we just want to show a diagram. We show this exact same diagram for all the sites, so you can just get a sense of the size and scale of the site. But this would be, if you placed a 4-story academic building in approximately this location on the rear of the site, and then you combine that with not just the gym, but this is all of the physical fitness, health, and athletic-related indoor facilities, and then all of the performing arts facilities. That just gives you a sense of how a 4-story academic wing combined with that, the amount of green space or open space it could potentially leave on the site. The reason we've shown the P here is the suggestion that there would be some parking potentially accommodated under the building. We're trying to avoid a lot of surface parking in any of the options we'll be looking at. But I would emphasize again, this is not intended to be a solution. It's intended to give you a sense of scale of that existing high school site. I'll just pause there, Mr. Chairman. Should you...
Questions or comments?
Okay.
Okay. Continue.
With regard to the existing high school building itself, the Massachusetts School Building Authority is going to expect us to do potentially 2 evaluations of a renovation to that building. One that keeps a lot of the existing building and one that keeps a portion of the existing building. It's not uncommon for them to ask for that kind of analysis. There are a couple of things that we would point out with regard to that. A phased occupied renovation of an existing building is always extremely complicated. This one in particular is, the complexity is increased as a result of all of the hazmat abatement that would have to occur throughout that renovation. So we think that beyond the challenges associated with converting this to a 21st century educational facility. Now, what do I mean by that? Because it's been added on to multiple times, it's not particularly well organized. The programs aren't located where you would want them to be. The adjacencies are poor. The structural grid within the 29 building prohibits significant modifications to the existing layouts. The original classrooms were sized much too small, which makes that, there are a lot of reasons why functionally this is going to be a hard, a very challenging building to convert to kind of a 21st century model for education. But even beyond that, the hazardous materials in the building would make it significantly challenging to complete as a phased renovation of an occupied building. So we think that the dollar cost associated with that is going to end up being significant, but we will be evaluating it. We'll be evaluating it where we keep, like I said, 2A is where we do a significant demolition of the existing building and new construction. And then you can see we've got bolded here, maintain as much of the existing building as possible for renovation. Then the 2B would be retaining only a small portion of the existing building as part of renovation. And you can see we started to capture some of the impacts associated with attempting to do a renovation addition project on the existing site. And again, this is 2B. It's going to be a very similar, with the exception that in this kind of scenario. And both of these are likely going to be carried into the next phase just because MSBA will want to see them. So it's our assumption now that we'll need to demonstrate the full impact and do a complete design and analysis on not only how the building would be affected, but also the specific cost associated with it in the next phase as part of the preferred schematic analysis. So, any questions on renovation addition, existing building? No. We'll also be taking a look at whether there's any benefit, and we refer to this as option 3, and again, in no particular order, but we'll be taking a look at the use of the Phillips site in addition to the use of the existing high school site to determine potential advantages of utilizing both sites and creating a campus. Certainly, the additional impacts associated with this kind of option would be the displacement of the buildings and services on the Phillips site, and we'll have to quantify and identify what that would be. And then finding a new home for those programs, both in terms of building and site, would be part of that analysis. Assuming that we carry this option forward into preferred schematic and spend some time studying it along with the other options between February and September of next year. Any questions? Okay. This is just showing the aerial of both of those buildings. We have the Council on Aging building located here, just as a reminder. The original Phillips building is here, and then the addition is located here. That's a shared building portion. And then the parking lot. The exact property parameters are shown here. You see there are 2 private parcels on that come into the corner of that property. Topography, you can see contours, 1-foot contours across the Phillips site. Let me just point out one thing. Okay. And although we'll be looking at a lot of different strategies, for example, would the entire high school building, if it were multi-story, fit on the Phillips site? And could this be completely open space? This diagram happens to show a scenario where we're trying to, because we're using the same footprint that you saw from the prior diagrams, just to give you a sense of scale. This is a 4-story academic wing, and this is the magnitude of the gym, fitness, athletic program combined with the complete performing arts program. And when I say complete performing arts program, that's auditorium, that's stage, that's music, that's band, that's choral, to just, again, give you a sense of scale. But this wouldn't be the only, presumably wouldn't be the only conceptual option we would study with the use of both sites. We would want to take a look at what happens if you put even more program on the Phillips site and what the opportunities are there.
Just a quick question. Is it feasible to do a elevated walkway between those, across the street there?
It is. Certainly, if we were going to do program elements on both sides of Common Street, it's highly likely we would want to bridge that with an enclosed elevated walkway connection. In fact, for those of you who saw the really early conceptual stuff we did around the interview, you saw a relatively complete-looking building design that included that bridge across Common Street. We've avoided showing that since then for fear we'd be accused of jumping to conclusions because it looks so complete and so real and so photorealistic. But we did explore that. And then one of the, again, because it's a town-owned parcel, one of the other areas we'll be exploring potentially as we move into preferred schematic beyond February is, unless we run, the goal in the next 3 months is to eliminate any option that just clearly does not make sense for the town. So that's the reason we're starting this discussion so early is we certainly, the preferred schematic phase between February and September of next year is challenging enough in terms of narrowing down to a final selected option. The last thing we want to do is congest it with multiple options that we know don't make any sense. So the next 3 months, the goal is to narrow those. As we look at what we're calling option 4, the idea of using the and it's really the combined, if you look at the site, when we're looking collectively at this entire area, which includes the Department of Public Works, it includes the stadium with the multipurpose field, the overlapping baseball field, the practice field, it includes the track and field, soccer field, includes tennis courts. We're talking about the entire parcel and considering reconfigurations and what might be plausible. You can see we're starting to identify some of the potential impacts. I think you certainly can't underestimate the impact associated with having to and by the way, my screen is not flashing. It's only the screens on the wall that are
We're a
flashing.
little technology challenged here sometimes.
Is the cable?
Luckily, it's not flashing on my screen. The biggest challenge of which might be trying to find a location. We'll talk later on about the challenges of finding a new location for the high school, but in my experience and certainly in conversations with Tim and Compass's experience, it's very challenging to find a new home for a Department of Public Works facility. So that certainly would be a challenge, maybe something the town has already solved to be determined, but can be a challenge. On this site, if we start to talk about movement of these existing fields and reconfiguration of these existing fields, or even potentially relocation of these fields, each one of these represents a pretty significant investment. So there's a pretty significant cost associated with moving it and or replicating it. We know that in looking at the open space and recreation master plan, this is a key element in a relatively central location of town. We know that the neighborhoods around it would certainly be impacted by the introduction of the high school, so we have to be conscious about what that impact may be and how significant it may be. And then we know that it would be introducing the high school in relatively close proximity to the Lowell School, so we have to be sensitive about that and certainly solicit community input on that. But again, because it's a town-owned parcel, our goal is to study it, see if there are any opportunities, see if there are any long-range benefits to the town, get some community input, and start a conversation around it. You can see there are a couple of curious things about this collective parcel, one of which is it's really, from a zoning standpoint and assessor database standpoint, it's really only divided up into two parcels, which is the parcel that includes these three pieces that we've subdivided into three for the sake of discussion here, and then this parcel that includes the track in the field. And interestingly enough, Whitney Hill Park, which is 6.07 acres, I think, is this parcel right here that's not highlighted or bounded, but it's this area. And the area you see behind the Department of Public Works, which is very steep, it goes from a grade of elevation of 65 to a grade elevation of 150 over a relatively short period, so just under 100 feet grade change across there. But that is open space. It's Town of Watertown open space. And we only distinguish that between Whitney Hill Park. It's still green or open space, but we just wanted to highlight that. And we're showing that right now the DPW, if you include the buildings in the rear that are excavated into this area, occupies 4.1 acres. And then we're showing the approximate size of 5.3 acres and then 6 acres for this parcel. The existing high school site is just under 5 acres. So all of these parcels in loose terms are equivalent to that if you look at this as representing 3 parcels. And the high school, the current high school site is a single parcel. And then again, for a sense of scale, we're showing this as if it's a building spanning over both the stadium area, which is located here, and the DPW, which is located here. Just graphically, I can't emphasize strongly enough, it's not intended to be a design solution. It's intended to give you some scale to those same program elements that we were showing on the other sites. And then just a rotation of that same graphic showing that if it only occupied the stadium site, kind of what would be left and freed up for purposes of scale. And so with that, I'll just pause related to that those collective parcels at the DPW and Victory Field.
John?
Just a quick question. I mean, you pointed out that you expanded the boundary line there behind the DPW. Do you consider that buildable in some fashion?
The reason we've expanded it is because it is town-owned open space. You could, your bylaws would allow you to construct a school in that area. To use it for school purpose would be one of the things you could use it for. So if you were to excavate a portion of it, certainly you could place something in that area, just like the DPW, when they constructed these buildings, excavated into it. So we don't want to dismiss it as the potential for excavating for a parking area, a multi-level parking area that has a rooftop garden over the top of it that continues the park. Like, at this point, we're just trying to keep all conceptual possibilities on the table.
Vinnie?
Just so you know, the count, that DPW parcel, there's two pieces to it, the piece that's on the hill, and then the piece where the DPW is. I want to say back in 2010 or 2012, the council voted to separate those two parcels and deed that, the open space part under the control of the Conservation Commission, because we wanted to preserve it in perpetuity as conservation space. So using it to build something on may require a two-thirds vote of the general court and replacement of like land. So just so you know that has that's why it used to be one parcel, and we had it surveyed and split into two parcels.
Vinnie, do you know if that would include, for example, if I'm just hypothetically, if something was built on it, but you replicated that area, for example, on the roof of it as green space, is it?
Depends, well, like I said, requires a two-thirds vote of the general court,
Yep.
and depending on how they would consider
Yep.
that.
Yep.
And the rest
They
of
wouldn't allow you to do
the
it,
other
yeah.
parcel next to it, the Whitney Hill parcel was deeded as open space in the 1890s under the.
That is
control of-
correct,
so
yeah, we
that's,
saw that.
But we actually consolidate that. There was three separate parcels. The parcel where the water tower was, the Whitney Hill parcel, and then this other DPW part. And we did that, I want to say 2010. So there may be, it's not, so as opposed to sort of, say, Victory Field, which is just a recreation space, we could build whatever we want on it. Because we deeded it as park space, it may require an additional hurdle.
That's a very good information to know, because and granted, we just started our research. In our early research, there was a lack of clarity on that, but that's very good to know. Essentially, it means to us that we would not want to go into that boundary.
And not the least of which, it's like an extinct volcano, it's like solid rock.
Right.
Like the Great Blue Hill.
The other option, and again, primarily because it's town-owned property, that we had initially suggested that we would take a look at, that we have at least very preliminarily, is Moxley Field. There are a handful of challenges associated with this that I would want to highlight right up front. One is that there's a limited amount of open space and recreation space in this part of the town, and certainly we would never suggest that this be taken away unless it could be replicated, which seems challenging considering the limited available land area. And then it's also the outdoor space for the middle school use, and then clearly you've got the middle school right across the street if you were proposing a high school in this location. So this may be an option that by the time we get through with the discussions over the next 3 months or sooner, that we want to take off the table unless we see some really positive reasons to continue to study it. But we do want to at least have a conversation about it. You can see, very much like the other parcels, it's just under 5 acres, very similar to the current high school site. You can see the setbacks there, and then for scale purposes, we've again placed that exact same diagrammatic footprint on that site. And you can see it, open space, this isn't nearly replicating what's there now, so certainly you would have to find something, and find something presumably in this part of town to replicate any displaced field area, again, making it very challenging. In the impacts, we talk about the traffic impact of bringing both of those schools in such close proximity, as well as the impact to the open space. Any questions related to Moxie Field? Okay. And then when we think about...
Hold on, Scott.
I'm sorry.
Just a question, and maybe I missed this. Could you estimate or what is the potential for putting an athletic field or complex in the existing high school spot?
The existing high school would accommodate a full-size field, but it wouldn't accommodate, say, for example, a full-size field with a track around it.
So a full-size field in a stadium, or, I mean, like...
When we think of a stadium, we think of bleachers,
Okay.
and so literally just the field. If you were into bleachers of any significant size, they don't fit there. But just think of it as a soccer field or a football
practice
field.
field, or a,
Yeah,
right, not a full competition field.
right.
Okay, just curious.
And you can kind of get a sense of that. Sorry, let me just go back. When we look at, for example, this Victory Field area is 6 acres, which is an acre more than the high school site. But the high school site sort of represents enough area to get that field done without the track and the clearances and everything around it. So the high school site would pretty much kind of go corner to corner within that track, and you wouldn't have enough room for the run out and the complete track on the high school site. But just in terms of scale, that's the high school site right there. Or if you look at it from this perspective, that's the equivalent of the high school site in that location, but there's not quite enough room to get bleachers and all the circulation that would be required around it on the high school site. We'll eventually be diagramming that on the high school site to give you a sense of that, but...
And then just out of curiosity, what is the acreage of the Phillips Administration Building lot?
I think that's 2.9. I don't think it shows up. Yeah, I don't think it shows up, but it's either, I may have it right, it's either 2.9 or 3.2, but it's in that 3 acre plus or minus range.
Okay. Thank you.
And certainly, if there were a parcel that became available that we're unaware of at the moment, that a new school could be constructed on, it would make all of our lives much easier. But we want to encourage anyone and everyone who has that kind of authority to be seeking them out. We've scanned everything, and even taken a look at recently sold parcels, and because land is so limited in Watertown, some of the recent private exchanges have involved as much as $4 to $10 million an acre, depending on where it's located at. So that's we've never seen numbers like that, but we've probably never worked in a city or town as small as Watertown and as close as it is to Boston. So it's a new experience for us, but land is valuable. But if there's anything out there, we're eager and ready to study it and to consider it as part of the mix during preferred schematic. So stay tuned.
Any questions on this? Kelly?
I just have a few questions. I was saving them all for the end. What about the 6 acres that the Mount Auburn Cemetery was selling? Is that accounted for?
Their asking, original price was 25, not asking, they were potentially asking for 25. My understanding is it's significantly above that, and Scott and I did take a ride to that site, and there are a lot of challenges to building a high school there. I don't know if, we really don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but
Yeah, a lot of the probably 25% of that property is up gradient, about 20 to 25 feet. And so at the end of the day, it looked like, just in a quick look at that parcel, it looked like there was only sort of 4 usable acres, all on the same elevation. And we could study it in more detail if it became viable, but it wasn't as big as it seemed to be when we took a walk and realized the significant change in topography at the rear of the site.
I just didn't know if it was worth the study or not. I mean, I understand if it's not in our budget, but it's another thing that, I mean, we're talking about huge slopes at Victory Field, too, so, okay. A question about the Victory Field, just understanding, I think one of the benefits of that location is just the adjacencies to the field, but then I was just noticing on the drawings that there's just an asterisk that says relocate athletic field to existing location, and I feel like you're losing the benefit. But then looking at the option where you rotate our pretend building and keep the DPW, it looks like if we shift that back, there may be an opportunity where we still have the stadium, and I mean, I'm just kind of envisioning here, stadium, tennis courts, and maybe even a little bit of parking, and then maybe have the public park moved to the old high school location. So I think, that's something that potentially could work if we can get creative enough. But I really think the benefit to that site is not having the kids walking to their athletic practices. I mean, that would be wildly convenient for them and make a lot of sense, so.
I agree, and it's a good point. As part of studying that site, one thing that will need to be determined is if, just as you suggest, we were limited to the DPW site only, and the goal was not to disturb the other 2 fields, could we accommodate the new high school there? Because once you start moving either one of those fields, you're not only incurring expense, you're eliminating one of the primary benefits of having the high school there.
Yeah, yeah.
Laurie?
I'm just going to throw out a crazy idea. We know long-term down the road, we will be looking at the middle school after the high school. So how much acreage do we have at the middle school? And if we put the high school at Moxley Field, could we eventually turn the middle school into a field, a rec field, or a football field? And then could we possibly move the middle school into the high school area, keeping the current Victory Field where it's at, adding the replacement for the Moxley Field, and then building other buildings that need a home, like the Department of Public Buildings. So I know that is long-term planning, but I think that's important to look at, and we can still keep the fields, move there, but I would just consider we take a look at that before we rule out Moxley Field.
We could certainly take a look at the sequence of that in the timeline, yeah.
I'll say it, we accepted, did an MSBA project just completed at the middle school to replace all the windows, and that came with a stipulation that we'll continue to use as a school building for 20 years. So it would be really long term after we're all long gone.
I think we should still think about it strategically from planning this.
Okay, let's move on to the next item, which is an update on ongoing activities and tasks.
Tim, did you want to go over your? Okay, yeah, that's the only thing I had, yeah. Yeah, just, I wanted to give the superintendent an opportunity. When we put this on the agenda, we would have not had a snow this week, and we would have had another visioning session to report on. So it was more or less to give Dr. Goldstein an opportunity to update on the ongoing visioning, but maybe it's a good time to make an announcement on the rescheduled date for that.
Yeah, so we've rescheduled that second visioning session to December the 12th, and then the final one will be on December the 16th, kind of close together, but at least our thoughts will be very current. And so we're very excited to continue that work and get very practical about what it is that we see for the vision for the high school. No more snow. At least not in December, please.
It's 2 to 6 on the 12th?
2 to 6 on the 12th, well, yes, 2:15 to 6.
2:15.
Yes. We're going to try to time it with the end of the fifth period.
Okay.
And we're doing that at the Missessian Art Center for the Arts.
Tim, the review of the proposed community outreach plan.
Sure. So I'm handing out what you see up on the screen here, which is kind of a draft of the communications plan or a community outreach plan. So, essentially, when we look at communication and community outreach around projects, we sort of look at it in sort of two ways. One is kind of a static way, in other words, where to keep information so that people can sort of at their own time frame decide to look at things and find things, and so that's kind of that represented sort of mostly in this bottom half, which I'll talk more about. The top half is more around sort of an active outreach program, and when we look at sort of the active outreach program, if you look at the project in terms of essentially two kinds of phases or two purposes behind that, the first is really heavily around feedback and getting feedback from folks on different topics, which, again, we'll talk a little more about. And then the second phase is really about education and sort of educating people about what the project is about. And, of course, throughout all that is the goal of transparency and making sure people are aware of what's happening in the town, in their own town. So that timeline that you see represented there is the timeline that we've presented here before, and it's the one that we presented at the first forum. It reflects, so it has the sort of major elements of the MSBA process, the preliminary design plan, the preferred schematic report, and the schematic design report, and then, of course, there's a period of sort of both MSBA and town approval. And those major boxes that you see are sort of kind of critical activities or basically activities around what's happening during those phases. And so what we look at sort of is trying to time those forums, the community forums, and there's essentially, those are the gold stars, to be around those major decision points so that the committee can get feedback and assist them in making their decisions. So largely it comes down to every other month or so, but it's not necessarily that, and we obviously have some, we would want to talk with you about coordinating the final dates around that. But that's the idea around the community forums. They would be geared toward getting feedback for those particular periods those particular decisions that we're looking at being made, and then it starts to morph into more explaining to people, this is the decision these are the decisions that have been made in the project, and educating people about the project. When the forums, so once the forums are through that process, then, at the end, we've called them roadshows traditionally, colloquially, sort of, and essentially those are and I'm going to hand out an example, which is essentially comes from a project we've done of a sort of communication plan that deals with the roadshows and sort of looks at various forums to put together, to put in front of people the actual presentation of the project and the various components that went into the decision-making, as well as obviously what the project will do and its cost, scope, and schedule, and what the tax impact is, and basically all the elements around the project. So as you can see in this sort of example, though it's an actual sample, but we kind of look for we need input, and we started to get some of that at the community forum, input from the community about where we should be going to get the most information out there about the project, as well as doing sort of cable interviews and press releases and opportunities around installations about the project in terms to educate people about it, and social media to the extent that, that's adequate and in terms of getting the message out. So that's kind of the public process around outreach. The bottom part of this program is sort of, and we're talking increasingly with the school department about the website and what we should be doing around the website to make it a little more navigable and so that people can go there and find information. So you can see a lot of what we talk about if you look at that venue under the particular informations. It really is housed at the project website. And so we'll be working to try to work with the school department on making sure that that's tabbed in a way that it's easily, stuff is easily findable and posted pretty quickly. But this is an example of kind of the way we look at how the information is housed and how people can get access to it. And, I don't think we need to go, I think they're pretty fairly self-explanatory, and I certainly would answer questions around it. One of the things we do want to work on, like, immediately, because we've found that if you wait too long with this, it just becomes very difficult to catch up, are FAQs and getting frequently answered questions, appropriate to the phase we're in, posted and have a place where people can go, because oftentimes the people have what we found is people have pretty much the same concerns around projects at different phases, and, there'll be some specific stuff around, obviously, as you can tell from some of the options, but there are pretty much generally predictable questions that come out of these projects typically. So we'll be working with that as well, trying to develop some, and we would want to work with the school, the school department, perhaps the chair, in just terms of make sure that we have a place to vet how we answer these questions. So we'll begin that process in the next few weeks and months.
Questions from the committee? I will say that from the feedback I continue to get from the first outreach meeting, it was very well-received, and a lot of people are still watching it on the cable, and there's a lot of good information there. So I think that worked well, and these will, I believe, in the future, continue to work well in helping the public understand what we're trying to do with the high school.
If I can I add? One thing, I'd just like to thank Scott and Compass as well. We also did that same presentation for the high school faculty today, which I think was really important, so that they also have a sense of the plan and what the next year or two are going to look like for them. So very well received as well. Thank you.
And we have actually tentatively want to discuss here setting up January 21st as the next forum. That's the Tuesday that has been set up by this committee. It's similar to the first forum. It's the Tuesday that's sort of the spare, I believe it is, the Tuesday that's kind of the spare meeting date. And that forum would be focused on the ed plan and ed planning and the educational program, and perhaps even if the options are developed, maybe beginning at least exposing them, but primarily it's around the ed plan.
Any other questions or comments?
I guess I don't know if there's a vote on that or whatever, but if we're going to, we should probably think about trying to advertise that, because I think probably the one thing we would want to do different than the first one is get the message out earlier.
And I also think working on the website, getting that there, we can, again, get it on Notify Me. We just have to make sure we have a spot to do that, whether it's at the lecture hall or here, preferably at the lecture hall, right?
The forum.
Yeah. I mean, or we could go even out somewhere else. We had talked about, like, going into different schools. I mean, might be nice to take it even to the middle school, maybe, in the auditorium, which is
I guess we'll work out the details
Yeah.
pretty quickly on that.
Yep.
So we'll move with that 21st, if that's okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Any other questions? General public, any other questions from the general public or comments? Okay. Scott? Tim? Nothing else?
No.
We don't have any invoices tonight. Next meeting, we have two choices, December 16th or December 17th. I've booked the room for 2 nights. Those were the 2 nights that were available. So if everybody could please let me know, if possible, by Friday, which of the 2 they prefer. I'll take the majority and we'll pick that night. So those are our 2 options that week, rather than the Wednesday, because the Wednesday, the room was booked. Any other comments or concerns? It's during the day. Perfect.
Mr. Chairman, I would just add that as a result of the snow that occurred early this week and the delay of the first visioning session, I believe December 16th is the
Oh, that's right.
rain date for the visioning session, and that's
But it ends
scheduled
at
to go.
6, so we can start at 6:15 if we
That's
have
right.
to.
Yep, that's right.
So again, please just try to get me your preferred date, and we'll work on that. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you.